Chris.
What's up, Tom?
I'm dying.
Really? Should I call?
No, it's
someone?
just, I don't know. I feel sick and miserable and gross, and I feel like nothing's right with the world. I was just wondering, do you know a cure for that?
I have one thing that comes to mind.
Oh, God. What is it?
Don't go see Joker.
Yeah, for fucking sure. Oh, my God.
Sorry, I didn't mean to steal your moment there. It's just that you sort of like led it into it.
I'm glad you beat me to it. I'm glad I didn't have to be the one to do it. Oh my God, this is my favorite comic book villain like ever. And I decided to watch.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, no question. No question. The Joker has always been my guy. Ever as long as Batman's been my hero, Joker's been my villain. And like, if
so
anything,
for all this talk about Marvel, you're
if
a
anything,
DC
Ledger
guy?
cemented. No, I've always been a DC guy. I've just always been miserable with what they did with the movies, but because the movies just kept sucking. But I've always loved the DC. No, for the longest time, I loved the DC comics. I didn't give a flying fuck about Marvel. And then I started watching the movies, and the movies showed me, oh, hey, these characters can be kind of cool. If anything, I think the Marvel comics just didn't hold up the way that I thought they would compared to how much I liked the movies.
Marvel comics always felt like I was too old and mature to read something. Like
Yeah.
I never felt like I was the target
They're very
audience.
obviously for kids. This movie, though, Joker, is not only not a kids movie. This is Todd Phillips' way of saying, "Hey, I'm not a comedy director anymore because in this day and age, you can't make a comedy, otherwise you'll get slaughtered by the woke crowd." Even though I don't think he actually knows what the woke crowd means. And I don't think he quite understands. Look, don't get me wrong, I get it. I understand where a lot of stand-up comedians and a lot of people who have worked in that field are coming from. Oh, I do 100%. Like, I've watched Bill Burr's special and I watched Dave Chappelle's special and all that stuff about all of them talking about the Me Too movement and how like that is and how that idea is really kind of infringed upon and restricted a lot of what they feel they can say with free speech. And I'm all for that. Like,
Right.
I'm all for those guys.
It's almost as if it's crippling their art.
Exactly. I'm all for those guys being able to cripple their art. And I agree with what Phillips and Phoenix were saying coming out of Toronto, where they were talking about we shouldn't, with how like people were so concerned with that, like this movie was actually going to cause another shooting akin to what happened in The Dark Knight Rises. Fun fact, there were no shootings around the time of The Dark Knight. That was The Dark Knight Rises. And, I understand where they were coming from in terms of like, yeah, we're artists and you can't hold us accountable for something that somebody else could do completely randomly. You know, our movie cannot be held accountable to that and we should not be restricted because of something like that. That I was completely on board with. But then he goes on this rant about fucking comedy. I'm like, yeah, why would I want to keep doing comedy? You know, I'm just going to get caught by by the secret police or something. And then
Right.
he had that nonsense with Phoenix on
Where
Kimmel.
was this said?
This was in his talks after Toronto, like when he was doing press right after Toronto.
For Joker.
Yeah, for Joker.
Okay.
And then he was on Kimmel.
So a part of the press circuit.
Yeah, and then he was on, and you know that shit happens. Tarantino's been fighting that shit for years. But he was on the press circuit, and for like Joaquin, he was on Kimmel, and they showed a clip, and I didn't watch the clip, but I know it was like filled with like all sorts of like, I don't know, like it feels like to me Phillips is one of those guys who is edgy, but not really because he has a reason for it. He's just kind of like, his whole thing is he comes from a comedy background, and he was a guy who like really reveled in for what I like to call the Apatow era of comedy, which, as you know, was about 2005 to 2009, and for a few years after. You know, gave us a lot of great comedies. And I've said this before, I love The Hangover. The Hangover is one of my favorite comedies ever. I love that goddamn
Phenomenal
movie. Really, really well done movie. And I don't know what the fuck happened, dude.
Well,
I don't know what happened.
you know, here's the thing. I feel like it's so, and I don't want to get too down the political train, but I will say this. He's right in a sense that, I mean, you know, it's like you shouldn't, this is the era of don't be afraid.
Right.
Right? Like
Unless
everyone's
you're
here,
one of the people who's getting persecuted.
everyone's here to like protect you and be safe and like
Right.
speak your mind, but yet I feel like but I feel like so like
Yeah,
everyone
so why
wants
is
to
it
be
I'm
all
feeling
open.
such an opposite vibe?
Exactly. It's like I feel like everyone's so for that until someone actually does speak their mind.
Exactly.
And then they're like,
oh,
you don't
quiet
agree.
that person. That person's part of the problem.
You don't agree with what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So then you just, and
Yeah.
even if it's something mild, but we don't need to go down the political
Yeah, right.
rabbit hole like
Well,
that.
I mean, and that's the sad thing is I feel like we do because for better or for worse, it's become part of this whole thing. By way of the press or Phillips or some awful combination of both. And right that back to when the script was leaked a few months ago. Well, not a few months ago, about a year ago it was leaked. And I'm like, You can't get away from it. This shit is so deeply entwined with it, and not to like for like a good reason. So my whole thing is that, yeah, we kind of have to talk about the politics. Bring it on, you know?
Okay. Well, let's bring it on. But before we jump into that, let's welcome everyone to our show.
Hell yeah. A little bit of an extended intro. Everyone? A little bit of an extended intro tonight.
But I think it's a good precursor to what we're about to get into. So why don't you just paint the framework of what the next hour of entertainment's going to entail for them?
I mean, the whole thing is we're here talking about The Joker, the new movie that just came out, directed by Todd Phillips, which of course is a one-off origin story about, in my opinion, the most famous and well-known comic book villain of all time. But the whole thing is this movie is not your typical comic book movie, right? This is not your older brother's comic book movie. This is not like a traditional, straight-up origin story for a villain. This is a ruthless, gritty gangster movie set in seedy Gotham City, circa 1980s. Very Scorsese-esque. The whole thing was that he was I think Warner Brothers was originally courting him. Back in trying to get Scorsese to direct this, back in their whole holy shit, Marvel is kicking our ass at every single turn. What the fuck are we going to do here? You take a project phase of around circa late 2016 to early 2017. And now they seem to be on the rise, but...
And you know what else this isn't?
What?
Your normal movie review podcast.
That too.
Yeah.
Because this is Talkin TV.
This is Talkin TV, baby. We're back, another episode, and we're talking about Joker. So, Dom... You've been saying a lot of great stuff.
Yeah, I've just been talking a lot.
It's been a little vague.
I want to get into the conversation.
But you have a lot of points. Take us there.
Okay. Where should we start? Because I have a lot of points.
Where do you want to start? I'm following your lead on this.
You know how I work best, Chris. You know how I work best.
Let's talk. You know what?
Pick each other's brains respectively. That's what we do. That's what makes this shit magic.
We held off our conversation in the diner. We sort of flirted with what we were going to say in this conversation about Joker. So, what about the political... Why'd you go straight to politics when we opened this podcast?
Because it's so all over this movie. Like, this movie is so obviously trying to be, like, anti-Trump and anti-today to the point where you have riots against the Wall Street of Gotham, you know, the rich and powerful, you know, very similar to the Wall Street protests and marches that were happening a couple years ago, you know, and, like, they even compare this to, like, the financial crisis of '08 or something akin to the Great Depression or something like that, where it's just this time of awful feelings where everyone is angry, everyone is pissed off, people are losing their jobs, they just want to find someone to blame, even though it's really nobody's fault. It's really just the system of a shitty economy, you know, and of just like how the world works and how people work. And so you like that's what I mean when I say you can't escape from the politics, because when you have a movie that is so deliberately apparent about what it's trying to say in terms of our modern day political stage, like it's impossible to get away from, you know, and with so, you know,
it's blatant. I think what this movie is about is it's more about the impact of the politics on society.
Yes.
On the little man, right?
Yes.
The person
very
who tunes
so.
into the major news networks never has a chance at being on TV, never doesn't want a chance at being on TV, just wants to live a normal life, but still gets crumbled.
Definitely. And one of the other interesting things I will say, one of the few things I actually did enjoy is seeing the dichotomy of seeing the right, you know, with them following Thomas Wayne and his mission to become mayor throughout the movie, as opposed to you also have the left as well, you know, with the talk show host with the character of Murray Franklin portrayed by Robert De Niro. And what's it called? And so that dichotomy, you know, actually seeing both sides of the argument, you know, the more entertaining talk show hosts that only want to, you know, bring joy to people's lives versus, you know, the hard right-wing Republican, and what the rich are actually doing in order to combat this threat, you know, this societal disease, for lack of a better word. I mean, I feel like that statement there is fitting enough.
Right. You know, I think that this movie, for all that and we should get into all that because we kept saying over and over again, we really didn't enjoy this movie.
Yeah.
But I think like one of the things it actually kind of did right was not give a fuck.
Yeah. And that's what I liked so much about reading the script.
You know?
I read this, and this was the movie that should, and absolutely you're right, this was the movie that should not have given a fuck at all. If any movie was going to say, fuck it, let's go all out, let's say it how it really is, then this would have been the one.
Because it was draped in political, in political background and meaning, and it was draped in personal quarrel, and it was just draped in like societal drama. But
Chris, I have one question for you. If all of that is apparent, right? And what do you know, why is it that I feel like all of that is kind of told to us and not shown to us? Did you get that sense?
Yeah, well, what I was going to say is, even though it's draped and all that, it didn't really feel like it was about that.
You don't get that it's about that. And that's understandable considering the movie's called Joker, not societal purge of how Gotham is a symbolic representation of our current times that we live in. But the whole reason for why his motivation of what makes him go where he goes in the direction that he does is because Gotham is just such a shithole. And I'm sorry, but at least for the first half of this movie, I don't think it did a very good job of portraying that. Well, I really don't.
Can I sort of like zoom out a bit?
Oh, sure.
Right? We're a little zoomed in right now, and I want to zoom out a bit. So for a long time,
like really deep in like the first couple minutes. We haven't even talked about like, the actual character of the Joker yet.
That's fine though, because I think like this movie really only had one character.
Yeah.
And I think the secondary character was the theme.
Yeah.
It was the sub
100%.
The sub storylines, not the supporting cast. I don't think they're as important in this movie as they are in most movies. I think what's important in this movie is Joaquin Phoenix and the drapings we all just spoke about. So I want to zoom out a bit because when I was reading, I mean, I've been reading DC Comics for probably like 4 or 5 years now. I've always gravitated to them more than Marvel. I just always felt they were more mature, and I always felt they were more intriguing, and they just more thought-provoking, like this movie, where we just instantly dove into so many...
And that's the one thing you can say, is that even though we didn't like it, that doesn't mean that it's still not a movie that we can have a discussion about. You know, if anything, I think that makes it more fascinating to talk about.
Exactly. It's not that this movie is bad because it doesn't offer anything.
Right.
It offers a lot.
It does offer a lot.
You just
for
have
better,
to
for
want.
Worse, it does
you just have to
lot.
want what's being offered.
Yeah.
And the trailer, for lack of a better term, was
not misleading. I can't blame this as like being deliberately like misleading or too revealing marketing, because it wasn't either of those.
No, it just was a little vague, in my opinion.
Right.
But
which is what it should have been. To me, that's what good trailers are. Good trailers are supposed to be vague and only give you the type of tone that you're in for.
We don't get those anymore. So I guess I felt a little misled because of that. But I guess it was more of like your traditional trailer, which is funny because it's everything I stand for that I'm now sort of complaining about.
Yeah.
But that's just because I want to zoom out. So let's zoom out, right? So I always thought it was stupid for the longest time in DC, my favorite comic brand, to have Gotham and have it always look like New York City. And then how they have New York City also exist in the DC universe. I was like, okay, this is dumb.
Okay.
Why are we doing this? And in this movie, it finally clicked with me that I think Gotham is such a beautiful place because it's sort of a way to over-dramatize personal quarrel with the way our society is being run, with the dirt in the streets, with the oversized rats, all the little subplots, right? All the little story-building character things without disrespecting, like, you know, a part of, like, America and like a huge part of the film industry. They used Gotham to me as like a scapegoat, and I like that in this movie. And I like how dirty it was, and how every single character you met was down on their luck, because I feel like if you like take time, and I think this is what this movie was saying, right? Take time to like see how your neighbor's doing. Yeah. Because if you really looked about how your neighbor was doing, maybe they feel the same way as you. They feel trapped. They feel beaten down. They feel like, you know, they feel pretty shitty, and like they're in a shitty city. And so I like that Gotham was sort of like the scapegoat secondary character in this movie. You know what I'm trying to say? And like... Yeah,
this was the first movie where I feel like they really made Gotham a character, whereas opposed to the Nolan movies with like the glossy, sleeky look, where it always looked like that upper rich level of like New York or Chicago, this you really like, this gave me like the real like Gotham City, you know, and like just this miserable... The way that I would always perceive Gotham always seemed like the worst place to live, like ever. Like I would never want to live in Gotham with all that crime, you know?
But I think to make a little more of a clear point on what I was saying, I just sort of like how unapologetic they were about talking about the shitty conditions and the shitty lifestyle that Gotham offers as sort of like, hey, we're going to introduce this in the first 15 minutes. And wake up, America, wake up, everyone, because this is like not just happening in Gotham, it's happening where you live too.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right, yeah, but like we're saying, we've been talking a lot about Gotham and the setting, and we both admit it's a very good setting, but this unfortunately is still a character story about the Joker, to the point where you admitted this is, everybody else feels secondary, to the point where they like may as well, like they're not even like, there's no other character that has like any sort of a presence in this movie besides him. Like everybody else is just secondary to contribute to his overall downward spiral. And
I'm okay with switching gears. I just felt like Gotham was a character.
Yeah.
And you know, it's like,
and it's been a long time since we've gotten a movie where the setting was like a real character. It's been a very long time since we've gotten a movie like that. So
yeah, we don't live in a perfect society, and I kind of like how this movie was about the little man.
Yeah,
you know, it was about there was not a clear hero. And if anything,
well, obviously it's about a fucking supervillain. Of course, there's not going to be any clear hero.
But there wasn't like a clear like latch on to this guy and root for them.
Obviously, again, that's not going to happen. That's not the type of movie this is.
And this
isn't the type of movie. Yeah. So in that sense, yeah, I absolutely get where you're coming from, and that it's good counter programming to kind of like, for lack of a better word, the whole hero's journey that
counter programming. Thank you. That's where I was trying to find.
What?
Just the whole it's great
counterintuitive, yeah, yes. Counter programming, good counterintuitive counter programming. Is that a thing? I don't know. I don't care.
It makes sense though.
Yeah. Now to bounce over a little bit, because it's probably very misleading how we kind of kicked this off by saying we both fucking hated this movie. Meanwhile, we're talking about like good, interesting things this movie does. Here's the problem, right? All of what we're talking about is good and interesting in theory. I feel like if that had actually been, thought of beforehand in terms of actually utilizing the society and showing the degradation of how that factors into this character's psyche, that would have been one thing. The problem is, I feel like a lot of that actually comes from the fact of we're told to feel that way, and as a result, we kind of are forcing ourselves to feel that way along with it, when in reality, it just feels like a manufactured bullshit Hollywood situation, where it's another world where everybody is a piece of shit, almost to the point where it's like, there are certain points where I don't believe that the characters would act this way, yes, even in this miserable, awful situation, to the point where, what's the word I'm looking for? It feels like one of those movies that's trying to make a statement, but doesn't really know what it's trying to say. It has a lot of good ideas.
Yeah.
It has a lot of good ideas, but it has no idea how to actually carry them through fully. Well, I feel like, and I feel like it's bouncing off of a lot of people's basic ideas of wanting to see something, and in a way manipulating them because they're fooled into thinking that they're seeing something deep, when in reality they're just being played yet another facet of Hollywood's continued liberal game.
Right, and so here's the thing. For all of the political drapings and trappings this movie has, it also simultaneously felt like it was afraid to really take a stance, though.
Yeah.
They hinted at, like, because if you look at politics right now, like New York, there's garbage on the streets. Los Angeles, there's literally people defecating in the streets. That's a fact. It's on the news. Any news station. Baltimore is overrun with rats.
Yeah, Baltimore, yeah.
But it didn't take a hard stance with the right or wrong. It was sort of just raising awareness.
Right.
And for me, I think that with this character, at the end, he clearly chooses.
That's the thing. That's one thing I do think where you're wrong is I do think this movie took a stance.
I'm talking about like Gotham as like if it was to be a character, it didn't really take a stance. It more so just like painted a picture. But like at the end, like, the Joker clearly chooses the path of evil.
But the other thing, too, is if we're talking about the rioters and everything that gets inspired by his actions, it doesn't feel like how a riot should act. It feels like a glorified, like, mob that rises to, like, it's like the slave revolt in Spartacus. That's literally what it is. And I hate that feeling, because that should not be the type of feeling that we get for a murderer. We shouldn't.
Right, he was a known murderer.
Exactly,
he has countless bodies at that point. Well, not countless,
and this ultimately, and this is where I hate, where this does bring legitimacy to the arguments against. But this does bring legitimacy to the arguments against why people didn't even want this made in the first place, because they don't want another white guy who came from a shitty background who ended up murdering a bunch of people getting over glorified. And that's what comes back to the shootings, and that's what comes out of the politics of it, and why this stuff is important, even though everybody would like to pretend that it's not.
Well, yeah, I mean, but like the Joker was created in the 40s, and he's right. White, but I don't think the skin color should matter with this character.
Not besides the skin color, just totally different political like things. And when he was created, he was originally created as like an actual cartoon character. Like the idea of the Joker has changed. The Joker, remember, like the Joker used to be a literal clown, like with like gadgets and stuff, where the whole thing is his gimmick was that his gadgets would kill you instead of like just doing the usual thing. But he was an actual clown, where now the Joker has evolved into this psychologically tortured character who's kind of the embodiment of everything wrong with the human condition. And in a way, like, speaking of the loss of words here, brain fart, but you see what I mean, though?
What do you mean?
In terms of like how the character has kind of evolved, in the sense of he's like the Joker that we have now, or our idea of the Joker as a character is not the same as like Cesar Romero. Like you put Heath Ledger next to Cesar Romero, they're not the same character. Yeah, they have the same name, they're not even close to being the same character,
Yeah, well, he feels like a human now, less of like a supervillain.
Definitely.
Definitely.
But that's the thing, is that if we're talking about like combining like a real human being with with like kind of the mythos involved in the idea of the comic book character, I still think Ledger did it better. Because I still think he had just enough of the comic facade while still making me feel like, oh my God, somebody would actually be capable of doing this. As opposed to with Phoenix's portrayal and with Phillips' take in this movie, it's to a point where it humanizes him almost to a fault. You know?
I could agree. I don't think there was any comic. I mean, there was the slightest comic feel, but it really didn't feel like I was watching a comic book character as much as I was watching.
And that goes into the whole approach of this movie where we cannot stress this enough. This is not a goddamn comic book movie.
It more so felt like
and this isn't even a situation like Deadpool, where even though it's rated R, it's still fun and it has a lot of fun action in it. This is not that kind of a movie.
This movie's
Please,
not fun.
For the love of Christ, do not take your 8-year-old kid to see this. I cannot stress this enough. Like, no 8-year-old should be anywhere near this theater.
Just any young child, yeah.
Yeah.
But it didn't feel like a comic book movie. It didn't even feel like we were watching a movie about a comic book character. Right. It felt like a very intense...
The problem is I felt like I didn't know what kind of a movie I was watching. And part of that does come from the fact that, yes, there's never been a movie quite like this made, so I give it props in that sense in terms of, it gave me feelings that I never knew I had because, it's something I've literally never seen before. But other than that, that just goes back to shock value and pure shock value. And aside from that, like... Again, shock value is only good when it's used to enhance something that's already great. And we've already talked about too many creators who relied on shock value and only that to enhance their very meaningless stuff. And I feel like this kind of falls into that camp.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I think so.
Where it's trying to shock you into feeling sorry for the Joker by showing you like, oh my God, what somebody would do in these scenarios. But the whole point of the movie is that it's supposed to show you what somebody would do in this scenario, you know?
Well, one thing I think that we've sort of lost is the ability to enjoy something that takes time. And that is subtle. I feel like a lot of what we see now has to be exciting. Like reality TV, especially, is a big
very bombastic and interface. Like we talked about on our last episode with Ad Astra, I mentioned like the idea of trying to do old movies today. Like, could you imagine a modern day audience sitting through The Shining? They'd complain 10 minutes in and say that it's boring.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, one could speculate that might be the case.
So you're right. This is a sense of where they're trying to mix in the poppy, flashy substance with, poppy, flashy spectacle with, some more deeper themes with a movie that kind of takes its time. The problem there is that this isn't the type of movie that warrants it. This is the type of movie that has spectacle in it. So I feel like whenever those shocking moments, I don't know. I really, this movie has me twisted for a loop. Like.
So that makes me think of this, right? I think as many faults as I can find with the DC, movies, and we know this isn't a part of the DC cinematic universe, but it's still a DC title. I like how they are a little less formulaic at face value.
Yes.
But this still followed a formula, though, right?
Yeah.
Because where I was going with the whole...
people have compared this a lot to some of Scorsese's movies, like specifically to Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy.
But they're not as predictable as a Marvel movie.
Not at all.
They're not as like every Marvel movie is a hero's journey.
You're talking the regular, like generic DC, like regular superhero movies, not like situations like this movie.
Yeah. I'm talking about like DC as a whole. I feel like they try and take a slightly different route, but I think the Joker... I want to assume the creators think this is like some real artsy, different thing, but really it's not.
It's not. It's really not. Especially since it embraces the Batman mythos in a way that I didn't think it was going to. I knew that Thomas Wayne was a character in this movie, but I wasn't sure how much of an active part that he was going to have in it. And when I saw the little kid in the trailer and predicted that to be young Bruce Wayne, I wasn't expecting to be right. And this goes back to the script, reading those scenes and then actually watching them in real life. His interactions with Thomas Wayne, with Alfred, that was great. Those are probably my favorite parts of the movie.
Yeah, because they were subtle. Yeah. And that's where subtlety is. I wish that movie had more of it.
Yes.
Because I think that we would have felt more, not for the character, but from the character, if when he was on the show that De Niro was hosting at the end, that was such a trendy way to kill De Niro. Yeah. Just pull a gun out and kill him. It all happened so fast.
It was great. I loved it.
It was a good moment.
Yes.
But I don't think it suited the film. I think that all of the action and violence in this movie happened too fast. To me, it was like a pacing problem. You have so much long, drawn out and then you just get to this quick explosion, and then it dies down.
Well, the thing that I'll say about that is that's kind of how you're supposed to feel. The movie is supposed to be like a very long, drawn-out, miserable, tortured experience to the point where everybody just goes fucking nuts. Probably, though, the best thing that I can think of is Do the Right Thing, right? But about where Do the Right Thing succeeds, where this movie doesn't, is Do the Right Thing always makes you aware of the environment and what's going on. You know, it really makes its characters a backdrop and a part of this environment. And the whole point of what makes that movie work is that there's a heat wave going on in Brooklyn. And fucking going back to our Duchess days, you know, with Jordan Stone, you know, yeah, he even says, like, when it's that hot in Brooklyn, it's a fucking nightmare. And nobody can focus on or get anything done because everyone is just so hot and miserable, you know? And that's kind of what I feel like this movie was trying to do. The problem is because because the movie doesn't start you off that way. It starts you off in the middle of the clown parlor. It doesn't start you off in the street, so you don't really get a sense of, like, where things are going, you know? And, like, when you see those kids, you know, take his sign, you know, when he follows them, it's not like he's doing that in the middle of, like, everyone, like, you really get the good close-ups of people in order to, like, just see how miserable and awful everything is. No, it just looks like a regular New York street, and he's just like a regular clown, you know? So when the kids steal it, you know, it looks like, oh, they're just deliberately bullying him and shitting on him, you know? And that, in my mind, leads to, oh my God, this is gonna lead to where everyone in this movie that's not him is an asshole, you know? And when A, that's not the type of movie that this was setting out to be, and B, that's also a very, very lazy Hollywood trope that I am sick to death of, where it just, the main character just goes insane because regardless of his actions, everyone around him is just a miserable, awful person in some way.
I'll tell you this much, man. I don't think you can compare this to Do the Right Thing, because even though
No, you can't. But I'm just using that as an example, you know.
I understand what you're saying. It made sense, but I just think that, like, Do the Right Thing is a little easier to follow, first off, because it's you know, from start to finish, morning to nighttime. Also, it's there's an explanation for the pacing, but yet each scene doesn't overstay its welcome.
Right.
I think that in this movie...
Do you think it also helps because there's more characters, and so therefore, because it's bouncing around so much, you can kind of never get bored, because even though you're in the same neighborhood, you're always, like, with a different character?
No, I think that there's plenty of movies where, like Interstellar, where there's not a lot of characters in that movie.
But there's a spectacle where... But
I wasn't bored, you know? I don't need a lot of characters to be stimulated. I just need good writing and good... And one thing I will say is that Joaquin Phoenix, I wasn't bored watching this movie.
No, me neither. Like, that's the one thing you can't say. You can't say that you're bored watching this movie.
I think what I'm trying to say is I think this movie suffered from... Everything was flashy, and I know that's who the Joker is, but he wasn't the Joker at this point in time. This was the sort of origin story. So I just don't think it felt realistic to what he would have been like for these crazy outbursts and these quick kills and these, like, you know, pursuing someone and, like, taking extra shots and wasting bullets, unless he really was truly that evil in his heart from the start to pour extra bullets than he needed into that guy on the steps after he shot him in the subway scene.
Well, the whole thing is that he's deranged, and that's, like, his break from reality. But I
didn't believe it then.
But yeah,
I did not believe it enough
at that point.
And that's my problem with this movie.
I
think I don't believe enough of what happens until the very end, and then it's ruined by the mob being so infatuated with him.
Do you think it's because he's painted as too sympathetic a character? At least in the beginning.
Yes.
You know?
They tried to humanize him too much. Yes. And I think that's what I keep coming back to.
And that's ultimately what I was trying to say with Gotham earlier. That's a problem.
That's what I'm coming back to.
It's everything that I was worried about
we found
from the minute. Yes.
We found it.
Is that, again, it's the thing that everybody complained about, that Phillips himself tried to deflect, but yes, he humanized the Joker too much. You know, and I'm sorry, but besides taking away from the allure of what makes the character interesting in the first place, because the whole reason what makes him an interesting character, right? And we're just talking from a comic standpoint, right? Forget, like, taking it apart from the comics and doing a radically different take and all that good shit. But when you're embracing the mythos as much as you are, you know, it is in Gotham City, the Batman mythos, it is loosely based on what was provided in The Killing Joke. So, like it or not, this is based in the comic mythos, you know. You're gonna garner certain expectations.
Yeah, this is in-game. This is, as far as we know, this is canon.
Yes.
And so it's frustrating.
Yeah.
When you know all that.
Well, not in the sense of, like, the current movie canon.
Right. But the universe,
but in terms of playing into the Batman mythos, yes, where, to the point, like you said, where the most interesting parts to me of this movie are the almost kind of like a reverse Batman origin story, where you're seeing kind of it from the opposite perspective, which to me was so goddamn fascinating, because we've always seen Thomas Wayne kind of portrayed as this angelic personality, you know, going back to Linus Roach's performance in Batman Begins, where you have Thomas Wayne as this kindly man who, to the point of where he even deflects how actually powerful he is, just for the sake of making himself look like a more sympathetic figure to his son and to kind of portray Gotham as more gray in a way than it really is. In this movie, like, you see Thomas Wayne as he really is, kind of reflecting the time of where we're living in now, where you see him as kind of this cold, soulless politician who's putting on the face, for the time. And seeing that and seeing his interaction, with Alfred at the gate, to the point where seeing Alfred probably for the first time ever.
As a younger man?
Not as a younger man, but as an unlikable character. He's a straight up unlikable character.
Yeah, he's kind of rude.
Yeah.
But, I mean, in his defense, he put his hand on a little kid and Alfred saw it.
Yeah.
It could have been way worse.
But again, minutia of the scene. But
yes, I know you
get what I'm talking about. But yeah, like, to the point where it's like, you almost see that scene of, like, him almost acknowledging Batman as a brother, where that's kind of been like a thing that's always lingered on my mind of what if these two were actually related. And this movie actually goes to that length and almost,
cool little twist
for
there.
A brief second, makes you go, oh, shit.
You almost believe it.
It adds a whole new layer to the Batman mythos without even trying. Yeah. And that is freaking brilliant. But I can't give credit because, if anything, it happened unintentionally. Because it's, as he stated, time and time again, that is not what Phillips was trying to go for with this movie.
Exactly. And so this is what I want to ask you a series of a few questions, then I'd love for you to elaborate on it, right? So it seems to me that the scenes that you actually give praise to are the scenes, because there's a lot where there's just Joaquin Phoenix.
Yes.
But it seems to me that, like, the scenes that you sort of enjoyed and felt were pretty top-notch were the scenes where he was acting with other people.
Well, no, not just with other people. It depends on the person. Like, there were a few times where I'm like, that doesn't really work. Like, I had a little bit of a problem with his monologue to Thomas Wayne in the bathroom because, A, I don't believe that was in the script, or it wasn't written that way, and B, it kind of just felt like this is me just kind of having to scream the theme of the movie rather than...
I didn't like that.
I would actually say that. I didn't believe that's something that his character would have said, from his portrayal. And
that was regurgitation rather than new information.
Definitely, rather than something... Or when he kills Glenn Fleshler, it's a masterful scene the way it's built up, but again, it's just it felt a little bit out of nowhere in the script, but I was okay with it. But watching it on here, I was like, something about this feels off, and then he leaves the dwarf alive, like it's very, very confusing to the point where it's like the whole thing of what makes this guy great is because he's so goddamn unpredictable, and this movie, it's making him predictable, where it's like, yeah, of course he's going to do this, and of course he's going to do that,
So what I was trying to get at, but I guess I can't, because I need to understand what you liked about this movie and why. Because I was under the impression that it was a little too much of just Joaquin Phoenix, and that him alone.
Oh no, not at all.
The typical trajectory of I'm going to be the loser. I'm going to go around the city. I'm the weirdo. I'm the freak. People are going to take advantage of me. I'm going to get beat up a bunch of times, and then we're going to get to the climax, and the movie's going to end, and that's not very likable. We've seen that before. So I was assuming that, like, you're giving praise to the scenes where there's just other actors because
that's not true,
it makes Joker actually feel like the Joker.
I didn't like how they use Zazie Beetz. The one thing I will say is they changed immensely. That's the thing. Of all the things, I'm very, very shocked this movie stuck as tight to the script as it did. Like, this movie was almost beat for beat exactly how it happened in the script, with the sole exception being the Zazie Beetz character, where they take a radically different approach in the script, and I'm not sure which one I liked better because it's just so completely different. Versus where I read that character, the character, her name is Sophie, and again, you wouldn't know that because I don't think they say her name once in the movie, where the character of Sophie, and you read her in this script, or at least I read her in the script, and you imagine, oh my god, this is a typical Zazie Beetz part, and then how they do it,
cool.
and how they did it in the movie, it worked, and I liked it, but I still didn't like their interaction. I didn't buy their chemistry together, if you even want to call that. And
I didn't buy them as a couple.
And the way the movie resolves that, it makes sense, because the whole point is that the whole thing was a figment of his imagination. But at the same time, with the way it builds up, like, he doesn't have, like, yeah, he's obviously very mentally impaired and has a giant series of mental illnesses as is explained. But like, they don't like the whole, like, him having hallucinations. And, like, him, like, inserting himself into his mother's flesh. Like, that part, I'm like, what is this? Those were the parts that felt, like, just very inconsistent. And those were to the points where I'm like, Phillips has almost got this, but it just feels like he's just going a tad step too far into it. And that makes me question, like, whether he actually knows what he's doing.
So that goes back to what I was trying to get at earlier when we were talking about, like, the dichotomy of, let's compare the Spike Lee movie to this
Do the Right
movie.
Thing, yeah.
Even though Do the Right Thing was so fast-paced, like, no scene overstayed its welcome, I think that a great example of a scene overstaying its welcome in this film, which happened quite often, but the first one that comes to mind is when the Joker shows up in Sophie's apartment. And she's like, you're Arthur from down the hall, right? And he's like, I had a real bad day. I just think like.
Oh wait, you're talking where it's revealed that
Where it's
he was
revealed.
that he was hallucinating.
I thought that
about her being
scene
with
lingered
him.
on a little too long.
Okay,
and many scenes for that matter.
I disagree. I don't think that was one of the scenes that bothered me. I like
then
that.
I guess
scene.
that's where we disagree because all the moments that
I like the scene for it being an interesting catharsis and subverting my expectations in a way that didn't piss me off. Where I'm like, oh, okay, I'm glad this didn't go in the direction that I thought it did. Because I was very, very unimpressed, like, with where they took the Zazie Beetz character in the script. Like, that, to me, was the definition of, like, oh, my God, of course, the most typical misogynistic approach you could go, you know? And I hate using that word, but, like, I feel like there's no other way to describe it.
It was. That I mean, for me, they felt... I just felt like we got a little too much unneeded context towards the end of the scenes where the moment had already happened, but then why are we still here? And that just could be a writing taste for me.
Okay.
I like when the moment happens and we cut to the next scene. So I like to think on what just happened. I don't need the explanation after the moment.
Right.
You know, like yes, we know you have a daughter sleeping in the back. Okay, we know it's an intense moment. Don't explain it to me. That takes me out of it. I felt this movie did a lot of that. And
that's the thing. I think that scene in particular is one of the more subtle scenes where she's just like, look, my kid is asleep in the back, whatever. She's like, I know you. I know you're down the hall, whatever. And in a way, it kind of made me look, because one of the problems I had is those scenes with her. And, when he's first with her, hanging out with her, like, he kisses her, and then when she says, oh, that guy that killed those guys on the train, he's a hero, those felt so artificial to me, to the point where when it's explained that they are, I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But then I take a step back and I'm like, but wait a minute, he doesn't have any history of hallucinations, and then they explain his mother did, because his whole thing is his mother was mental, had some sort of mental illness, but, yeah.
I think this movie was, in a sense, easy to get away with some of the problems because...
Okay, I can get on board with that.
You know what I mean?
I can get on board with that thought process,
and I think that's another problem I have with it. It's like, oh, okay, so you learn about an hour and a half in that he has hallucinations.
Right.
So it can excuse... So I guess, like, I feel like to the less trained viewer, it makes the movie better because as you get... I feel like, as you get to, like, the end...
Yes, but, again, even looking at this from just a simple entertainment standpoint, like, there's still too many scenes where this just feels like such a long, deliberate drag to a build-up that arguably is like,
Right. I just hate when the whole psych ward character and you realize halfway through, oh my God, this might not be real. But then I don't like excuses in film.
Right.
I feel like I've said this before in the podcast. I feel like we've lost the art of, with the Tarantino movie, when we talked about that, I feel like we've lost the art of classic filmmaking. And a lot of it's just like parlor tricks and flash and
well, I mean, in a way, that's what filmmaking has been about. Because if you go all the way back to George Méliès, like, yeah, of course, that's what filmmaking started out as, parlor tricks and flash.
And the Great Train Robbery.
So in a way, that's what it's always been. Film has always, for the most part, has always been about show, bread, and circus. There's always been that element to it, but... which of course, like I said, that always would be like a theory that I would love to bring up, just be like this idea of film has always been bread and circus, and kind of like this idea that these auteurs were drawn to it, and kind of, again, we make this joke all the time about the two critics arguing about the meaning of the tree, and then the artist comes along, it's like, I just felt like painting a tree, and that whole thing of like, is there even really any art in movies, or, was it all just entertainment to begin with, that we just kind of came up with this massive whole thing just because we're human beings and we do shit like that.
I understand what you're saying. I believe there is art in movies.
I do too, 100%.
Yeah, I believe that was always the original intent, so that's why it's so discouraging to me when a movie gives
I don't know about that for original intent, but I do believe there is art in movies. But original intent, that's a different discussion right there.
I do believe in that.
Because original intent, like George Méliès, he wanted to put on a show, That was his whole thing. His whole goal was entertain. Charlie Chaplin's whole thing was to entertain. Buster Keaton's whole thing.
There
is an art to it, yes, but there is an art to it, yes, but I think in the way that we perceive, like, it's different kinds of art,
I think this correlates to Joker, though, however, is that I just think that it had a lot of promise, and now I was invested in the first few minutes of the film. I was like, okay, I like this. Down on your luck character. Let's see how he turns into the monster that we know.
Right.
But I just think
it's like
it's so many shortcomings.
Can you even call him a monster at the end? Like,
no.
I didn't get, like, I'm like, yeah, he's still like Arthur Fleck, Like, I was looking for it. I'm waiting for it. I'm like, okay, when is he the Joker? When he stabs Glenn Fleshler, I'm like, okay, now we're going to, and then he shoots Murray in the face on the live show. I'm like, yeah, here we go. And then it's like, nope, he's still Arthur Fleck.
How'd you feel about Murray?
He's good. It's a good Robert De Niro performance. I think that, I think that's the illusion, the king of comedy there. That worked. Where Robert De Niro goes from the obsessed fan to now he's kind of the Jerry Springer-esque part. And he's fine enough for the job he does. He's a good actor. He's good at taking direction.
I think it's a good Robert De Niro
Yeah, it's a good Robert De Niro performance. Yeah, he does fine in the role.
I think we needed more supporting characters like that to help paint the dichotomy.
I think if they'd disperse the supporting characters in more so, like in that's the thing, I can't even say that because I liked how they were utilized in the script. The script is written almost the exact same way that you see it in the movie, where I like those long, deliberate points with just Arthur, where the characters kind of only come in where the plot calls for it, because it is that type of a movie, where the characters would really only interact with this guy if the plot calls for it,
Fuck, you're right. You're right, but why don't I feel like this was a good movie then? Like, why do
execution?
Execution.
Because reading how something is versus seeing it played out are two different things. And we have talked all the time is that, and you want to know what makes me even more sad is I've said time and time again is that good actors can't save a bad script, but a good script can save a bad movie. I like the script. I thought it was a good, well-written script. And this was not a good movie. I don't think the movie utilized the script well.
Yeah, because I feel like if you listen to this
and I don't know if this just comes from the fact of Todd Phillips was not the right person to direct this, or I'm just a fucking idiot and I don't know what a good script is. I thought I did, but I like Tarantino's script, but apparently his scripts don't follow any of the conventional screenwriting rules, where he even said it. He writes his scripts more like novels than actual scripts. Then why is he regarded as one of the best writers, And that's why at the end of the day, it all just comes down to entertainment,
Well, if there's one thing I learned in music school, it's that you learn the rules of songwriting, but then
you break them.
But then you're encouraged to break them.
Yes.
But you need to have the foundation.
Right.
Which goes back to my argument of, I think a lot of these younger filmmakers need to be more into the classics.
Right,
and I think
we're losing that. This was a situation where it was a young filmmaker, but it's not. It's Todd Phillips, who's been around for some 20 years now. He's been directing movies since the 90s, writing movies since the 90s, and he wrote this with Scott freaking Silver, who is a Hollywood pro when it comes to that for writing.
I was painting the character of Chris, the host of the show, by saying that. So you can understand, so that people can understand that we've done a few of these more where I'm coming from.
Right.
And I feel like what I wanted to get back to was, because we're almost towards the end here, but I feel like if you listen to this review up until the last 5 minutes, you'd think we kind of like the movie.
Yeah.
But we don't.
We really don't.
We don't. And I feel like we can't give a good reason. Like, what did we say? We felt gross.
Yeah.
We both pretty much said it at the same time. Like, we just felt gross. We sat in our chairs. We didn't get up right away. I just didn't want to move.
We got a hero's journey. We got a hero's freaking journey to the point of him conquering the dragon at the end, shooting the fucking guy that made fun of him in the goddamn face. And I'm sorry, for a movie that is literally called Joker, it's not even like a thing where he's trying to elude away. It is literally an origin story for the Joker. I'm sorry, not my cup of tea. Not what I want to see. I don't want to see a glorification story for a Joker, especially not in the way that he's characterized. I'm sorry, but it's in the sense of, what this felt like? This felt like turning the Sandy Hook fucking shooter, the fucking Columbine shooter, into a motherfucking hero. And making him look like, oh, he's a good person. Oh, because he shot one bad person. Meanwhile, he fucking is kill. That's okay to kill millions of people. It's not, buddy. It's not.
It was gross.
Yeah. I don't want to feel that way. I'm sorry, I don't. I get it. Art, subjective. Great. I just don't want to feel that way.
I think there's a time and place, and I think this was the wrong time and place. This wasn't the right movie to... If that's how you feel, director, that's fine. You're entitled to feel that way, right? Todd. This is the wrong time and place.
Todd, too.
This is the wrong... Yeah, his name's fucking Todd.
Xander Berkeley, dad from Terminator 2. Okay, Todd. That shit.
We don't want you guys... I mean, I don't want you guys... I don't want to speak for Dom. I don't want you guys to think that what we said up until now also doesn't have merit, because it does. There was a lot of takeaways from this film that were positive. But if you want to watch a movie that you can't quite understand why you don't like it, then this is the movie for you. If you want to be genuinely puzzled, and even after us talking about this film in depth for the past 45 minutes,
I agree.
We've come to some conclusions.
Yeah. Wait, 35?
45.
Okay, good.
We've come to some conclusions, but we still can't quite understand why we don't like it.
Yeah. It's very confusing.
Crazy.
It's very, very confusing.
Yeah.
But,
I
guess kind of to wrap this up,
let's wrap this up now.
Joaquin Phoenix is really great in it. I liked him. There were a few points in this movie where I feel like he's kind of going for the whole, just look at how crazy I am. And I don't know whether that comes from him or Phillips' direction. But, do I think he's going to get an Oscar nomination? Honestly, I don't know. I really don't know. Like this Oscar season is off to such a weird start. Like at the very least, last year we had A Star Is Born, which even though that movie was like different than your typical breed of Oscars, like I can still see like the beats of like, okay, I can see how this is gonna play out for Oscars. Like I genuinely don't know. I could see him, like, depending on how the competition stacks up in terms of who he's up against for Best Actor, because I still think it's going to be the same five that everybody thinks it is. I hope Adam Sandler gets a nomination, but he's most likely not going to. So we'll see. But yeah,
I'll say that Joaquin Phoenix was not really a part of my problems of this film. He embodied the Joker, I think, for this part of the Joker's life.
Yeah,
this is what I would imagine pre-Joker Joker would act like.
Yeah.
Arthur Joker would act like.
Yeah.
It was good casting.
I don't know. I just felt like the theatrical part of it, maybe because, like I said, I don't find clowns entertaining. You know, I like the Joker's act. I like what the Joker usually does, you know, with the laugh and the sarcastic one-liners and the creativity, you know. I felt like that was lacking, you know. And instead he's just doing these weird dances, you know, showing off how malformed and mangled he looks. You know, he just does that shit and it's a lot of running and getting hit by things. And I'm like, I'm sorry, like... The appeal is lost on me. I get it. The whole point is to show is to find the comedy in just like the most miserable looking aspects of the human condition. But I'm sorry, that stuff's not funny to me. You know?
Yeah, I agree. Hey, can I raise like a little quick like sort of funny point before we head out of here?
Sure. And if it's about that fucking sense thing, I swear to God.
No. That's I don't want to spoil anything specific from the film, specifically like lines from the film. But there is something funny in there with sense. If you guys pick up on that, I really enjoyed it. It was a visual gag.
Yes.
But
so laughed twice.
2019, man.
2019.
Our podcast is under 10 episodes so far still, but we've already spoke about clowns twice.
Yeah.
What's up with 2019 and clowns?
This is a fucking weird ass year, dude.
Clowns are in the
weird
pop culture.
fucking year. Let me tell you. Year of endings, definitely, but oh man, weird fucking year.
This decade, the last year of this decade was defined by clowns in cinema. I mean, not really, but there
I don't know
is,
about that.
hey man,
but...
I think having one movie that is a huge blockbuster be about clowns,
right,
sort of is like a big deal. To have two in 1 year,
but that's also like a traditionalist blockbuster. So even though it has a clown in it as the villain, that's about as traditional as you
I'm just not on board with the clown shit. Let's get over it.
Okay,
you know, I'm
but you liked
about
it too.
Yeah, it's okay. It was the Indiana Jones of horror films.
Okay. All right.
So, whatever.
Yeah.
It's Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Fucking clowns, man.
Clowns, yeah.
Fucking clowns. So I guess, like, our ratings out of 5. And
yeah, ratings out of 5. And would you go see it again, I guess?
Start. I don't feel like doing it first this time.
1.7.
1.7.
I thought that the second it was over.
I don't know. I want to give this one the benefit of the doubt, and I want to go 2.5 because you're right. As we've discussed it, there is a lot of fascinating elements of this movie, but for how it's all executed, my God, what a misfire!
The reason it even gets over,
fucking misfire.
I have 2 reasons for my score. The one comes from Joaquin Phoenix's performance.
Yeah.
The 0.7 is De Niro.
Just Joaquin and De Niro. That's it.
Great performances.
Yeah. So for me, for the reverseism on Batman, for Phoenix's performance, and good set design.
Yeah,
I'll say that.
Cool.
It's about as it's about as faux Scorsese. The problem is that for the era of Scorsese's filmography too, that it was going for. If we're getting into like some really nitty gritty for like real film geek stuff, I don't know. There was something about like, you know, that era is like ripe in like celluloid film. It's like those movies wouldn't work if they're shot on digital. So seeing that type of like atmosphere, what it's trying to go for in a digital sphere, I think that kind of takes away from the allure of it in terms of the tone that it's trying to go for.
Yeah, it was clashing, but I did enjoy the cinematography.
Oh, the cinematography, the camera work
itself. But it was clashing.
The camera work itself is good, but I also wish that, like, I still wish I really got a sense of the world, you know? Like, I feel like those big, wide, massive shots, there were none of them to be found. It's all quick editing and quick close-ups or medium shots, you know?
Enough.
And I wanted a little bit of that elegance in it.
I agree. Well, Dom, you know
so I go 2.5 out of 5.
2.5 out of 5.
2.5 out of 5.
I'm a 1.7. Yep. This was our review of Joker.
Yep.
Thank you guys for listening.
Yep.
Where can they find us, Dom? We are officially on the social media.
We're officially on the social media sphere.
On the streaming services.
Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, Talkin TV Podcast. That's TalkinTV no G, Talkin TV podcast on Instagram and Facebook. You can also find us under that name on everywhere where you go to listen to podcasts, Spotify, iTunes, Anchor. It's also the new stuff. Also, check out my YouTube channel, Movie Nerd Reviews, where I will post the video format of these if you're one of those guys that likes listening to podcasts in the video format as well.
Yeah, and I make music. Check out my band, The Stash, if you want.
It'll be in the descriptions for the podcast.
It'll all be there. We appreciate you guys listening to another one of our creative endeavors. This is cool. I enjoy doing it. Me and Dom are looking each other in the eyes in this
First
episode.
time, too, for one of these things that we're recording.
It's late.
It's a very different kind of experience.
It's getting weird, but this was a good episode. Thank you guys for listening. We appreciate it.
Hey, guys, watch movies. Watch more fucking movies. Stop watching Netflix. Watch movies.